The Iran-Iraq War, lasting from September 22, 1980 to August 20, 1988, was one of the longest and most devastating conflicts of the 20th century. It was marked by massive casualties, extensive use of chemical weapons, and destruction on a scale rarely seen in modern warfare. The war originated from long-standing territorial disputes, political rivalries, and ideological conflicts between the two nations, with Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein hoping to capitalize on Iran's post-revolutionary turmoil to establish regional dominance. Instead, the war turned into a brutal stalemate that reshaped Middle Eastern geopolitics, devastated both nations' economies, and left lasting scars on their societies. The roots of the Iran-Iraq War can be traced back to historical territorial disputes, particularly over the Shatt al-Arab waterway, which serves as a strategic economic and military passage connecting the Persian Gulf to the interior regions of both countries. Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, sought to renegotiate a 1975 treaty with Iran that had granted Tehran significant control over the waterway. Furthermore, the 1979 Iranian Revolution, which led to the overthrow of the US-backed Shah and the rise of Ayatollah Khomeini's Islamic Republic, deeply alarmed Saddam Hussein. He feared the revolutionary ideals of Iran would inspire Iraq's Shia majority to revolt against his Sunni-dominated Ba'athist regime. Khomeini, in turn, called for the overthrow of Saddam, branding him an oppressive and illegitimate leader. In addition to these territorial and ideological tensions, Iraq sought to assert itself as the dominant power in the Persian Gulf. Saddam Hussein believed that Iran's post-revolutionary chaos and weakened military made it vulnerable to an invasion. He also had the backing of several Gulf Arab states and Western nations, which saw Iran's revolutionary government as a greater threat to regional stability. Encouraged by these factors, Iraq launched a full-scale invasion of Iran on September 22, 1980, expecting a quick victory. Instead, what followed was an 8-year war of attrition. Iraq's initial offensive in 1980 saw rapid advances into Iran's Khuzestan province, a region rich in oil and home to a significant Arab minority. Saddam Hussein had anticipated that these Arab communities would welcome the Iraqi invasion, but instead, they largely sided with Iran. The Iranian military, though still reeling from purges after the revolution, mounted a fierce resistance. Iraqi forces captured several key cities, including Khorramshahr, but struggled to advance further as Iranian resistance stiffened. By early 1981, the Iranian military began regrouping, fueled by a wave of nationalism and support for the new Islamic government. Volunteers from Iran's newly formed Revolutionary Guard, Pasdaran, and the paramilitary Basij force played crucial roles in counterattacks. Iran's military strategy involved human wave assaults, which, despite resulting in enormous casualties, eventually pushed Iraqi forces back. By mid-1982, Iranian forces had recaptured Khorramshahr, marking a turning point in the war. Instead of negotiating a ceasefire, Iran, under Khomeini's leadership, chose to take the fight into Iraqi territory, aiming to topple Saddam Hussein's regime. Iran's counteroffensive into Iraq in 1983 saw initial successes, but by 1984, the war had devolved into a brutal stalemate. Both sides engaged in trench warfare reminiscent of World War I, with extensive use of artillery bombardments, human wave attacks, and chemical weapons. Iraq, in particular, used mustard gas and nerve agents against Iranian forces and even civilians, most notoriously in the 1988 Halabja massacre. The war also saw the so-called tanker war, where both nations attacked each other's oil facilities and commercial shipping in the Persian Gulf. Iran targeted Iraqi oil exports and vessels belonging to Gulf Arab states that supported Iraq, leading to heightened tensions with the United States. By 1987, the U.S. had deployed naval forces to protect Gulf shipping, resulting in direct clashes with Iran, including the destruction of Iranian oil platforms and the downing of an Iranian passenger jet by a U.S. warship in 1988. The Iran-Iraq War was not merely a bilateral conflict. It had significant international dimensions. The United States, Soviet Union, and several Western European nations provided material and logistical support to Iraq, seeing Saddam as a counterbalance to Iran's revolutionary influence. Gulf Arab states, particularly Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, funneled billions of dollars in financial aid to Iraq, fearing Iranian-inspired uprisings in their own countries. Meanwhile, Iran found support from Libya, Syria, and North Korea, as well as sporadic assistance from China and Pakistan. Despite their ideological differences, both Iran and Iraq also acquired arms from various sources, including clandestine deals with their adversaries. The most infamous example was the Iran-Contra affair, in which the United States secretly supplied weapons to Iran in exchange for the release of American hostages held by pro-Iranian militants in Lebanon. The war also saw significant arms purchases from the Soviet Union, France, and other nations willing to profit from the conflict. By the late 1980s, both Iran and Iraq were exhausted, having suffered hundreds of thousands of casualties and economic devastation. Iraq, with continued foreign aid, modernized its military and launched a series of well-coordinated offensives in 1987 to 1988 that recaptured lost territory and inflicted heavy losses on Iran. Iranian morale began to decline, especially after failed offensives and increasing economic hardship caused by U.S.-imposed sanctions and Gulf Arab financial pressure. One of the final turning points was Iraq's widespread use of chemical weapons, which significantly weakened Iran's military capabilities. Meanwhile, Iran faced internal dissent and an increasingly frustrated population. By mid-1988, under pressure from the United Nations and the international community, Khomeini reluctantly accepted UN Resolution 598, which called for an immediate ceasefire. On August 20th, 1988, the war officially ended, though diplomatic tensions between the two nations persisted for years. The Iran-Iraq War left a profound impact on both countries and the broader Middle East. Iran suffered an estimated 500,000 to 750,000 casualties, while Iraq's losses ranged between 250,000 and 500,000. Millions were displaced, and entire cities were left in ruins. Economically, both nations were devastated, with Iran's infrastructure severely damaged and Iraq burdened with massive war debts, particularly to Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Politically, the war solidified Iran's theocratic government and bolstered its Revolutionary Guard as a powerful military political force. In Iraq, Saddam Hussein emerged militarily stronger but financially weakened, leading to his invasion of Kuwait in 1990 in a desperate attempt to recover Iraq's economy, triggering the Gulf War. The war also left a legacy of sectarianism, with long-term repercussions for regional stability. The Iran-Iraq War was one of the deadliest conflicts of the 20th century, driven by a complex mix of territorial disputes, ideological differences, and regional power struggles. Its brutality, including chemical warfare, mass displacement, and economic devastation, shaped the political and military landscapes of both nations for decades. Though it ended in a ceasefire with no clear victor, its consequences rippled across the Middle East, setting the stage for future conflicts and shifting alliances that continue to influence the region today. The war stands as a grim reminder of the costs of prolonged warfare, particularly when fueled by external interests and deep-seated historical rivalries.